right, welcome back to Spring Into Math 5. This is Mr. Stein wrapping up Chapter 10 with our Part 2 review. Okay. So, let's talk about volume. We're going to find volume using unit cubes. And it almost seems like these two lessons are almost out of order. If you think about it, we're going to look at unit cubes or counting cubes first and then go to the idea of using the formula for volume. But this first one, we're really going to focus in on length times width times height. Okay, so volume is the amount of space inside a solid figure. Okay, these cubes make up a rectangular prism. The cubes represent the volume of the prism. Okay, so this prism is 5 cubes by 2 cubes by 1 cube. So if you think about it, we have 5 cubes on length, width is 1, height is 2. Okay, in other words, it's 5 cubes long by 2 cubes high and 1 cube wide. So you can multiply each of these values together to get the volume of the rectangular prism. Okay, so if you're multiplying them together, 5 times 2 is 10, 10 times 1 is, well, 10. So you have 10 cubic units. Now, the units are cubic units because you're multiplying 3 numbers together. So anytime you're multiplying, length, height, and width, you have 3 numbers, so you're going to use the marker for cube, the 3. Okay, now, here's another prism. First, we have to identify the volume. To identify the volume, we have to identify the measurement. So we have a length of 6, a width of 6, and a height of 6. Makes it fairly simple. So with length times length, width, and height of 6, next we substitute these values in the formula for volume and then we solve. So our formula for volume is, as I said just a moment ago, is the volume equals length times width times height. All right, so we're just going to substitute those values in, 6 times 6 times 6. And anytime you're doing this, just work yourself down in a triangle. 6 times 6 is 36 times 6, and 36 times 6 would work out to be 216. All right, so the volume of this cube is 216 cubic units or units cubed. Now, what is the volume of this figure? So first, to figure out the volume of this prism, identify the measurements. Okay, so if you see here, all right, we have 4, 4, and 3. Okay, so if we're working this out, okay, we're just going to plug it in. And like I said, we had 4 times 4 times 3. I'm going to multiply 4 and 3 because I like 12. 12s are pretty easy for me. So I have 4 times 12, and 4 times 12 is 48. Okay, so it has a volume of 48. And if I slide back, it's just cubes, so cubic units. All right, now let's try a few more. So this one's kind of like the one we started out with. So if we just go, we have 2 times 1, and it looks like times 5. Okay, well 2 times 1 is 2, times 5, and 2 times 5 is 10. Okay, all right, now let's take a look at this one. This one is set up in inches, not just cubic units or just cubes. So again, we just identify the values. We have 4 times 2 times 2. So we have length times width times height. Well, 4 times 2 is 8 times 2, and 8 times 2 is 16. I could have done 2 times 2 is 4, and 4 times 4 is 16. Wouldn't really matter which order you go. Okay, now this one we have 1, 2, and 4. So again, just set it up. 1 times 4 times 2. So 1 times 4 is 4, times 2 is 8. So in this instance, it's 8 inches cubed because inches is my measurement. Okay, now let's really dive into volume. Okay, so you've heard the word volume before in everyday life. We just kind of talked about it. So we can talk about the volume of water in a pool or a glass or a pitcher or whatnot. Now, this concept we're going to focus in on finding the volume of a prism. So a prism, as we talked before in the last review and in some of the other lessons, is a 3-dimensional figure with 2 congruent parallel bases and rectangular faces or sides. So the prism is named by the polygon which makes up its base. Volume is the measure of how much 3-dimensional space it takes up or holds. Now, imagine we have the fish aquarium, so you can see one here just to help you visualize it. Okay, its length, width, and height determine how much water the tank will hold. If we fill it with water, the amount of water tells the volume of the tank. All right, now, we measure volume in cubic units because we're multiplying 3 numbers together. We talked about that, length, width, and height. Now, we will look at several ways to calculate volume. All right, one way is to use the cubic units. So volume, as we've said, is the amount of space a 3-dimensional solid takes up. So one way to find the volume of a prism is to consider how many actual units it contains. So a unit cubed is simply a cube measuring 1 inch, 1 centimeter, 1 foot, or whatever unit of measure we're using on all the sides. Okay, so let's look at these two. And these two representations of a cubic inch and cubic centimeter is it's just 1 times 1 times 1. Well, 1 times 1 times 1 is 1 because you're never going to get anything more than 1 there. And so that's the value of 1 unit, in this case inches or centimeters. Okay, now we simply count the number of unit cubes that fit into the prism. So we begin by counting the number of cubes that cover the bottom of the prism and then count each layer. Let's see how this works. Okay, so you see here, all right, so if we were to think about counting them, I mean, this one's not that hard in terms of how big it is. So if we were to think about it, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so if we're counting 6, and then if we have how many rows? We have 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, if we have 4 rows of 6, 4 times 6. So keep that in mind. Okay, so if we were to count them all, and we counted all those 4 rows of 6, we would get 24 cubes in our prism. So the volume of this prism is 24 cubic units or units cubed. All right, let's try another one. Again, this one's not that much harder. It's just a little bit bigger. So again, let's count them. If we have 3, 6, 9, 12. So we have 12 in one row or column, however you want to think about it. So we have 12, and then we have 1, 2, 3, 4 rows. Well, 4 times 12. It's 48. So there are 48 cubes if you were to go ahead and count them all. Now, it's a little hard because there's all those ones behind it. So if you do like counting cubes, if that's a strategy that works well for you, I would use how I did and count one of them and then think of it like an array. It's like when you count an array, you count 4 on top and 4 on the bottom. Well, 4 times 4 is 16, and that's how you would use arrays to help you with multiplication. It's kind of similar using the cubes to figure out volume. Okay, so if you look carefully, you'll see that volume of a rectangular prism is a function of multiplying the length times the width times the height. Essentially, that's what I was doing by just doing a little bit different with counting the whole rows. All right, so our formula is length times width times height. Now, in order to take the concept a little further, like we talked about in our, not last video, but our last main or second to last main lesson, we can use, when we have three-dimensional figures, we can use the idea of the base. So length times width gives you your base, and then you multiply that times height. All right, so another way to write the formula is you replace length and width, and you add b for base. So the volume is equal to the base area of the prism times the height of the prism. Okay, so if you look at this one, we simply put the values for the length in. So if you have 16 and 9, 16 times 9 is going to be your base, and then you're going to multiply that by the height. Okay, so if you're just using the formula, you have length times width is 16 times 9, and 16 times 9 is 144, so that's going to be your base. So you're going to have a base of 144 centimeters cubed. All right, and then you just insert that into your formula as the base, 144 times 4, which is your height, and 144 times 4 is 576, and then you go back to the centimeters cubed because you had the 2 with the length times width, and then you added the height, so then it makes your third value, which gives you your cubed. Okay, so now let's wrap it up using volume in the real world. Okay, so we've talked before that you're going to use things, different scenarios in homework and in performance tasks and different things. And so real world problems are always there. So volume is something that comes up a lot. Okay, so just as a recap, we have a couple quick things. If you look at this slide, we won't go over it in too much depth. Think about it, length times width times height. So you multiply those together. 9 times 4 times 6, and you're getting 216. And then cubic feet or cubic centimeters or cubic whatever. In this instance, it's feet, so it's feet cubed or cubic feet. Okay, in this one, we have a rectangular prism, so we're still using length times width times height. And if you have 10 feet times 10 feet times 4 feet, well, 10 times 10 is 100, and 100 times 4 is 400. So then in this case, it'd be 400 feet cubed or cubic feet. Okay, and then back, and our last thing to wrap up this chapter is back to our good old fish tank or aquarium. And I'd say aquarium since we're talking feet, not necessarily, fish tank you might think of it's a little smaller. So if you use our formula, if we're thinking volume equals base times height, well, let's determine the base. 3 times 2 is 6, times the height of 2. 6 times 2 is 12, and then in this case, it's feet cubed. All right, so that's going to wrap up Chapter 10. See you next time for Chapter 11.